We spent years fumbling with peeling, chopping, and burning dinner, only to find out the real secrets were hiding in plain sight. What if the simplest tricks could have saved you hours? And why did no one ever tell you until now? Batch cooking and freezing was not just a kitchen habit, it was a way of life for busy families trying to stretch time and dollars across the week. In the 1970s and 1980s, home cooks would spend their weekends filling pots with chili, trays with lasagna, or baking pans with casseroles. Then, piece by piece, those meals were cooled, cut, packed, and frozen. The goal was simple: cook once, eat many times. A full freezer was like money in the bank. On hectic weeknights, all you had to do was reach in, reheat, and serve. It saved time. It saved sanity. And most importantly, it meant fewer nights of staring into the fridge, wondering what you could throw together in 10 minutes. Back then, it was normal to see stacks of labeled foil containers in the freezer, each with a strip of masking tape and the date scribbled in marker. The food was not fancy, but it was ready. And ready was everything. Today, meal prep is trending again, but the old-school batch cooks already knew the secret. The future always tastes better when you make it ahead of time. The electric skillet was the unsung hero of the countertop. Flat, plug-in, and always ready to hustle when the stove was full or slow. By the 1960s and 1970s, these shiny, lidded gadgets were everywhere. They heated evenly, they cooked quickly, and best of all, they cleaned up easy. Stir fry? No problem. Pancakes? Faster than any griddle. Grilled cheese? Just plug it in and flip. The electric skillet took some of the pressure off the stovetop and turned every available corner of the kitchen into a cooking zone. For families with one oven and too many mouths to feed, it was a lifesaver. For kids learning to cook, it was a safe place to start. And for working moms and dads, it meant dinner could happen while they answered the phone or helped with homework. The beauty was in its portability. You could bring it to the table, to the patio, even to a potluck, and it made the whole kitchen feel more manageable. These days, it is easy to forget about the electric skillet. But back then, it earned its spot on the counter by proving, meal after meal, that speed and simplicity could come with a power cord. Non-stick cookware changed everything. Before Teflon-coated pans hit the shelves in the 1960s, making eggs without breaking them or flipping pancakes without tearing them was a full-time job. You needed butter, you needed oil, you needed luck. But once those slick black pans started showing up in kitchens, suddenly cooking got easier, way easier. You could fry, saute, and scramble without half the mess or half the cleanup. The food lifted effortlessly. The pans rinsed clean in seconds. It felt like cheating. Non-stick was more than a surface. It was a time saver disguised as a miracle. It meant you spent less time scraping and more time serving. And it gave beginner cooks the confidence to try meals they might have avoided before. Even kids could handle the stove when the risk of sticking was gone. Sure, over time the coating wore down and you had to replace them. But for what it gave you in return, speed, ease, and fewer burned dinners, it was worth every penny. Non-stick cookware took away the guesswork and gave back the joy. Pre-cooked canned meats were the shortcut you never saw coming. Tuna, chicken, ham, cooked, sealed, and waiting on the pantry shelf like time capsules of convenience. Open a can, drain, mix, and eat. No thawing, no slicing, no mess. These meats became the backbone of fast meals. Sandwiches? Done. Casseroles? Ready. Salads? Just add mayo and stir. For households where dinner needed to be on the table in 20 minutes or less, canned meats were a game changer. And they were not limited to emergency use. People planned around them. Recipes called for them. Lunchrooms served them. From chicken salad to tuna noodle casserole, these ingredients made it possible to cook like you had hours, even if you only had 15 minutes. Some turned their noses up at the idea of meat from a can. But anyone who grew up on pantry cooking knows the flavor held up and the time saved was worth it. Pre-cooked canned meat was not just a budget option. It was a survival tool in a fast-moving world. Meal planning calendars were the unsung organizers of the mid-century kitchen. Pinned to fridges or taped inside cabinets, these printed grids laid out breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 7 straight days. For some families, they came from magazines. For others, they were hand-drawn with pencil and eraser marks from constant tweaks. Either way, they gave the week shape. And in a house full of hungry mouths, shape was everything. Meal calendars saved time at the grocery store. They cut back on waste. They ended the nightly panic of, "What are we eating?" and replaced it with quiet certainty. You knew what was coming. You prepped for it. You even looked forward to it. The structure helped stretch ingredients across multiple meals. Monday's roast became Wednesday's sandwiches. Friday's pasta cleaned out the fridge. Planning was not about perfection. It was about peace of mind. And for the cooks in charge of keeping everything running, those boxes on paper meant more than anyone knew. Meal calendars may not hang in every kitchen anymore, but their rhythm and logic live on in every pre-written grocery list and slow cooker plan that saves the day. Convenience box meals were the culinary cheat codes of the late 20th century, and no one used them better than busy families. With brands like Hamburger Helper leading the charge, these boxed wonders promised a full dinner in one package. Just add meat, stir, and serve. It sounded too good to be true until you tasted it bubbling on the stove after a long day. These meals came with seasoning packets, dried pasta or rice, and instructions that fit on the side of the box. No measuring, no guesswork. Just quick comfort food that stretched a pound of beef into something that fed everyone at the table. In homes where both parents worked or time was always short, box meals were not shortcuts. They were lifelines, and kids loved them. That creamy stroganoff, that cheesy macaroni, the smell of dinner done in under 30 minutes. It was magic in cardboard. These meals made cooking less intimidating, more predictable, and more fun. Today, they still exist, but the golden age of boxed dinners taught us something important. Convenience is not about being lazy. It is about being smart with your time. Defrosting meats in the sink was the pre-microwave hustle everyone quietly relied on. Dinner was frozen solid at 4 o'clock. You had mouths to feed by 6. There was no time for a slow thaw in the fridge, so you filled the sink with warm water, dropped the wrapped meat inside, and hoped for the best. It was not glamorous, but it worked. Ground beef would loosen up, chicken would separate, and with a few flips and a watchful eye, you were cooking by sundown. This trick was handed down like folklore. No one really taught it. You just saw it happen and picked it up. Microwaves eventually made thawing faster, but the sink method had its charm. It was kitchen ingenuity born out of necessity. It saved dinner countless times and turned panic into progress. You did not need gadgets or timers, just hot water, a little patience, and a plan B if it stayed frozen. Today it feels old-fashioned, but for a lot of families, this was the original fast-forward button in the kitchen. Using scissors in the kitchen was a quiet revolution, and once you started, you never looked back. While knives took center stage, kitchen shears did the quiet work of saving time and cutting effort. Snipping herbs directly into a pot, slicing strips of bacon without needing a cutting board, even shaping dough or trimming pie crusts faster than you could say, pastry cutter. By the 1970s, more households were catching on. Scissors were not just for wrapping paper anymore, they were for dinner prep. And once they made their way into the kitchen drawer, they stayed. The beauty of it was speed, precision, simplicity. You could cut as you went, with one hand on the bowl and the other doing the trimming. No extra dishes, no wasted steps. It was intuitive, satisfying, and weirdly fun. You felt like you were getting away with something, breaking a rule and saving a minute all at once. Today, shears are still underrated, but in the kitchens of the past, they were a quiet weapon in the war against wasted time. Dump dinners were the weeknight heroes of the 1980s. Low effort, big flavor, and no bowls required. You grabbed a casserole dish, dumped everything in, meat, sauce, starch, veggies, and baked. That was it. No separate steps, no sautéing, no endless stirring. Just a pile of ingredients that came together in the oven like they were meant to be there. Busy moms loved them. Tired dads swore by them. Kids barely noticed how fast it happened. They just knew it tasted good. Tuna casseroles, chicken and rice, beef and noodle bakes. Dump dinners had endless variations and infinite forgiveness. You could mix frozen vegetables with canned soup, top with shredded cheese, and still call it a homemade win. It did not have to be fancy. It just had to be warm and filling. Cleanup was a breeze. Flavor was guaranteed. And the prep? Less than 10 minutes if you knew what you were doing. In a world where time was short and patience shorter, dump dinners were not just practical. They were brilliant. They proved that good food did not need to be complicated. Sometimes it just needed to be dumped and baked. Double-duty dishes were the mark of a smart cook. One meal today, another tomorrow, all from the same base. Roast a chicken on Sunday, and you had chicken salad sandwiches on Monday. Make a big batch of spaghetti sauce and use it for lasagna later in the week. These were not leftovers. They were planned-overs, designed to stretch time, save money, and make the most out of every hour spent in the kitchen. Meatloaf became the filling for stuffed peppers. Leftover mashed potatoes turned into crispy patties the next morning. It was not just about cooking efficiently, it was about thinking ahead. Home cooks in the 1970s and 1980s were experts at this. A beef roast could become hash. A pot of chili could be folded into burritos. Even soups were thickened and repurposed into pot pies or pasta sauces. Every ingredient had a second act. Nothing went to waste and no one complained because the food was still good, just dressed a little differently. This strategy meant fewer trips to the store, fewer hours at the stove, and fewer moments of dinner dread. You looked at a meal and saw tomorrow's solution, and that kind of thinking turned kitchens into time machines. Aluminum foil-packed dinners were like tiny edible gift wraps filled with flavor and freedom from cleanup. Home cooks in the 1970s loved this trick. Just toss in meat, vegetables, maybe a pat of butter or a sprinkle of seasoning, then wrap it all tight in foil and pop it in the oven. The magic was in the simplicity. No pots, no pans. Just a hot bundle steaming in its own juices, ready in under an hour. Kids would tear theirs open like presents at the table, releasing clouds of savory goodness. And the best part? You just threw the foil away after. It was cooking and cleanup rolled into one. It worked for picky eaters too. Each packet could be customized. One kid hated onions, no problem. Another wanted extra carrots, done. Foil-packed meals gave tired parents back their evenings and gave families a dinner that felt like it took hours, even though it barely took 30 minutes. Today, the technique still pops up on campgrounds and Pinterest boards, but long before it was trendy, foil packs were the fast-track secret of smart kitchens across America. Keeping leftover grease was the secret every great cook knew but never wrote down. After frying bacon or roasting meat, they would pour the hot drippings into an old coffee can, jelly jar, or ceramic crock, set aside like liquid gold. It was not waste, it was seasoning. And in the days before pre-flavored everything, that grease was the shortcut to turning simple meals into savory masterpieces. You could fry eggs in it, roast potatoes with it, start a stew, or season green beans. Every spoonful added depth without needing extra spices, but it also saved time. You did not need to measure. You did not need to open half the spice rack. You just scooped and stirred. It was flavor that lived in the fridge, ready to jumpstart dinner. Some homes had bacon grease jars that lasted years, strained, reused, always there when you needed them. Today, many have traded this trick for bottles of oil and butter. But back then, leftover grease was the kitchen's most underrated time saver. A little bit of yesterday always made tomorrow taste better. Assembly line. Sandwich prep was not glamorous, but it was genius. In homes with 3 or more kids, and sometimes even just one time-crunched parent, making sandwiches one by one was not an option. So moms would clear a section of the counter, lay out rows of bread slices like playing cards, and get to work. Spread the mayonnaise down the whole line, add cheese to each one, then ham, then mustard, then the top slice. And just like that, 6 lunches were done in minutes. It was faster, it was cleaner, and it made the chore feel like a system, not a scramble. Even better, it meant no one forgot an ingredient or ended up with a mystery sandwich at school. You could wrap them in foil or plastic and stack them neatly in the fridge, ready to grab the next morning. Some parents even prepped sandwiches for the whole week. In the age before meal kits and pre-cut deli subs, this was how the real pros did it. Efficiency with a side of love. Assembly line lunch might not have been glamorous, but it got everyone out the door fed, happy, and on time. Boiling water from the kettle was the stealthy speed trick every busy kitchen relied on. Whether it was electric or stovetop, that whistling pot saved more time than anyone gave it credit for. Instead of waiting 10 slow minutes for water to boil in a saucepan, you had it steaming hot and ready in under 2. That meant instant noodles were truly instant. Sauces thinned in seconds. Tea, oatmeal, mashed potatoes from a box. All done before the commercial break. Kettles were not just for tea drinkers. They were for multitaskers, short-order cooks, and anyone trying to feed 5 people before a game show ended. You could even pour the boiling water directly into pots already full of pasta or soup stock. It sped up the whole process and gave you back precious time. And if you used it to soak stubborn dishes? Even better. Kettles may seem old-fashioned now, but back then they were silent time-saving heroes, hiding in plain sight right on the stove. Prepping vegetables during television time was the art of multitasking before smartphones ever entered the kitchen. You would grab your potatoes, onions, or carrots, settle into a favorite chair, and peel or chop away while the latest soap opera or quiz show played on the screen. It was not a chore, it was rhythm. Peel, react to the plot twist, dice, laugh at a commercial. For many, it was the only time in the day to slow down. The kitchen prep became background music to the drama unfolding on screen. And the best part? You barely noticed the work. A whole bowl of potatoes would be done before the show even ended. This trick turned dinner prep into something almost relaxing, even meditative. It also meant when the show wrapped, dinner was halfway done. Families who cooked together often did this as a group too. One person peeling, another cutting, all gathered in the glow of a dusty television set. These small moments of quiet productivity made meals feel smoother and, in their own way, turned cooking into a kind of comfort. Putting recipes on the fridge with magnets was like building a command center for your kitchen. Simple, hands-free, and always in sight. Instead of juggling cookbooks or losing clippings under a pile of bills, home cooks clipped their favorite magazine recipes or handwritten instructions and slapped them right where they needed them most. Stuck with a colorful magnet, those recipes stayed eye level while pots boiled and pans sizzled. It meant you could glance up to check a step without flipping pages or smudging the ink. And if something splattered, a quick wipe and it was good as new. Some kitchens had a rotation of family favorites that lived on the fridge full time, like the sacred meatloaf formula or grandma's casserole scribbled on a note card. Others used it to try something new every week. It became a system, a rhythm, a way of saying, dinner is planned, we've got this. Today screens have taken over, but there is still something deeply grounding about a recipe held up by a magnet in the heart of the kitchen. It reminded you cooking could be easy, and even a little fun. Layered cold salads made the night before were one of the greatest hidden time savers of the dinner table era. 7-layer salad, taco salad, even those wild gelatin molds with floating vegetables. They were all made in big glass bowls, covered and tucked into the fridge like buried treasure. It was the kind of prep that rewarded you twice. Once with a quiet night off, and again the next day when dinner was already done. No stove, no reheating. Just lift the lid and serve. The beauty was in the layers, carefully stacked in a way that kept the lettuce crisp, the toppings fresh, and the dressing from drowning everything too soon. You could see the colors through the glass. You could taste the planning. These salads were not just convenient, they were showstoppers. Perfect for potlucks, picnics, or those weeknights when energy was low but expectations were still high. Moms everywhere swore by them. Grandmas passed down their favorite versions, and for busy households, they were the closest thing to magic, dinner that made itself while you slept. Using ice cube trays for sauces and broths was the kind of clever kitchen hack that felt like it came from a survival manual. After making a stew or roasting meat, there was always a bit of liquid gold left behind. gravy, broth, pasta water, tomato sauce. Instead of throwing it out, home cooks poured it into ice cube trays and froze it solid. Once frozen, they popped out the cubes and stored them in freezer bags. Later, when a soup needed depth or a pan sauce needed body, they would just toss in a cube or two. No measuring, no waiting, just flavor, ready in a flash. It was portion control before that phrase became trendy. It was meal planning without a spreadsheet. And it worked. You could add broth to rice, tomato cubes to pasta, herb-infused butter to eggs, all without chopping, heating, or starting from scratch. It turned yesterday's scraps into tomorrow's head start. For those who learned it young, this was more than a trick. It was a mindset. Use everything. Waste nothing. Cook smart. Wearing kitchen timers on a lanyard or apron string was the ultimate move for cooks who never sat still. Back when multitasking meant stirring gravy while flipping laundry and helping with homework, having a timer tied to your body was a quiet act of brilliance. No more missed beeps. No more burned biscuits. You heard the ding, you moved. Some timers clipped onto aprons. Others were looped around the neck like a chef's stopwatch. It gave cooks freedom to walk to the garden, answer the phone, or hang up laundry without losing track of what was simmering. In the days before smart speakers and digital reminders, this was high tech. It was confidence you could wear. The tick-tick-tick kept you grounded, and when the bell rang, it pulled you back to the stovetop like a homing signal. Today, most timers live on ovens or phones, but for a while, the ones you could wear were the quiet champions of perfectly timed dinners and no-fuss roasts. Frozen bread dough was a time saver hidden in the freezer aisle, waiting to turn any night into bakery night. Instead of mixing, kneading, rising, and proofing, you just opened the package, let it thaw, shaped it, and baked. That was it. No flour clouding the counter, no sticky hands or yeast failures, just rolls, loaves, or pizza crusts in a fraction of the time. For families on a tight schedule, frozen dough meant warm bread was still possible. Even on a school night. It felt like a gift. The house smelled like a bakery, and no one knew how easy it really was. Some home cooks kept a few loaves in the freezer at all times, ready for company, soup nights, or those days when dinner needed something extra. You could brush it with garlic butter, add herbs, even braid it for special occasions. It baked up golden, soft inside, and always disappeared fast. Frozen dough may not have been made from scratch, but the time it saved gave back something even better: peace, ease, and the power to put bread on the table without breaking a sweat. Storing onions and potatoes together in a root drawer or basket was not just convenient, it was downright strategic. These pantry staples were the base of almost every home-cooked meal, so having them side by side meant prep started faster and smarter. No digging through clutter, no last-minute search for that one soft potato. Just reach in and grab what you needed. For many homes, these root baskets lived near the fridge or under the counter, dark and cool enough to keep things fresh but accessible enough for everyday use. Onions gave soups their sizzle, potatoes stretched meals for hungry families, and both were there, always, like old friends waiting patiently. Storing them together created a natural rhythm to the kitchen. The cook did not waste time opening multiple cabinets. Everything began in one place. It may seem like a small detail, but for time-saving cooks, that basket was the secret weapon. Using a blender for more than smoothies was the quiet revolution of the mid-century kitchen. Sure, it could crush ice, but the real magic happened when it started blending pancake batter in seconds, pureeing soups without a pot swap, and even breaking down meat for sandwich spreads. Housewives in the 1950s and 1960s knew a good blender meant fewer dishes, less elbow grease, and faster meals. Whipping cream? Easy. Emulsifying dressings? Instant. Even baby food was made fresh in minutes, long before the shelves were stocked with jars. It was all about doing more with what you had, using one machine to speed up 10 tasks. The blender sat proudly on the counter, not hidden away because it earned its space. Every whir was a shortcut. Every pulse was a promise that dinner would be easier tonight. And for the cook with a dozen other things to do, It was a small, buzzing miracle. Cooking large roasts for multiple meals was the kind of slow-cooked wisdom passed down from generation to generation. You did not make a beef roast just for Sunday dinner. You made it for Monday sandwiches, Tuesday stew, and maybe Wednesday hash. The idea was simple. Put in the work once, reap the rewards for days. A roast was more than a meal. It was a plan, a strategy. You carved it carefully, portioned it smartly, and tucked it away for later. It saved time, it saved energy, and it made you feel like you had already won the week. Leftover slices went into lunchboxes. The drippings became gravy. The bones turned into broth. Nothing was wasted. Everything had purpose. And in the world before meal kits and takeout apps, this was how families stayed fed without losing their minds. It was slow food with fast benefits. Wax paper was the unsung hero of mid-century kitchens, a silent partner in nearly every baking or frying task. It slid under dough when rolling it out, making the cleanup as simple as crumpling and tossing. It caught breadcrumbs when coating chicken or fish, saving time and sanity. It even acted as a makeshift funnel or pastry bag in a pinch. Housewives swore by it. Grandmas stacked boxes of it in the drawer like it was currency. And for good reason, wax paper kept food from sticking, pans from crusting, and hands from scrubbing for hours. It made messy jobs manageable, and it gave cooks the freedom to try ambitious recipes without worrying about the aftermath. Today, it may seem old-fashioned, but wax paper once held together the entire rhythm of the kitchen, quietly, efficiently, and always just a drawer away. Pre-sautéing onions in bulk was the kind of behind-the-scenes prep that made busy weeknights so much smoother. You would chop a whole bag of onions, cook them down until golden and fragrant, then freeze them in small portions. When dinner rolled around, you were already halfway done. No more crying at the cutting board, no more waiting for the stove to do its job. You just grabbed a bag, tossed it in, and let the flavor bloom. These pre-cooked onions saved precious time and layered every meal with richness. Whether you were making soup, pasta, or casseroles, the foundation was already there. It was flavor on demand. In homes where dinner had to move fast and still taste like it took hours, this trick was a godsend. Smart cooks were not just thinking about tonight. They were building a flavor bank for the week ahead. Hanging utensils on pegboards was a time-saving trick made iconic by Julia Child, but used by countless cooks who were tired of rummaging through drawers. The brilliance was in the visibility. Every spatula, ladle, and whisk had its place, right in front of you, ready when needed. No digging, no clanging, just reach, grab, and go. It turned the wall into a tool belt. You could cook with rhythm, knowing exactly where everything was. It was a small change that made a big difference. Cooks found they moved faster, prepped cleaner, and stayed calmer. In homes where every second counted and every meal had to land on time, that pegboard was more than decor. It was a map, a method, a kind of kitchen choreography that saved time without sacrificing quality. Layering ingredients for grab-and-go crockpot meals was the ultimate set-it-and-forget-it strategy for working families. Before heading out in the morning, the slow cooker was filled. Dry pasta on the bottom, meat on top, sauce and veggies layered in between. No mixing, no fuss. By the time you came home, dinner was done. Hot, hearty, and waiting. The layers cooked themselves into a perfect blend of texture and flavor. This technique was not just easy, it was liberating. It gave cooks their evening back. No standing at the stove, no watching the clock, just a hot meal that tasted like effort even when there was none to spare. Families swore by it. Neighbors shared their best combinations, and the crockpot became a trusted ally in the war against dinner-time chaos. Lining pans with paper towels or foil was the kitchen shortcut you never knew you needed, until you tried it once and never went back. Cooks would line skillets when frying bacon, or baking trays when roasting vegetables, and suddenly the scrubbing disappeared. Grease was soaked up. Burnt edges lifted clean. Breading stayed crisp instead of welding itself to the pan, and cookies slid right off without sticking. Cleanup became a matter of tossing a sheet, not soaking a pan. That meant less time hunched over the sink and more time actually enjoying your meal. It was smart. It was simple. And it saved your hands from hours of work. Even today, it feels like a small miracle. The meal still came out delicious. The pan stayed spotless. And the cook stayed sane. This trick worked so well, some home cooks even pre-lined the pans hours before cooking to make prep even easier. In a world of shortcuts, this one always punched above its weight. Serving leftovers as new meals was a clever trick that turned repetition into reinvention. Last night's chili became today's baked potato topping. Roast chicken transformed into quesadillas. A scoop of spaghetti got reborn as a cheesy pasta bake. Sometimes it was a casserole, other times a skillet stir-fry. Whatever it took to make a rerun feel like a premiere. The trick was not just reheating, it was repackaging, changing the shape, adding a new flavor, making it feel like something fresh. Smart cooks knew how to disguise a repeat meal so no one noticed, and everyone appreciated it. It saved time, avoided waste, and kept things interesting. You could take leftover stew, toss it into pastry, and call it pot pie. Or turn last night's meatloaf into sandwich patties with a splash of sauce. It was less about cooking and more about curating. A little cheese, a dash of herbs, a new side dish, and suddenly dinner felt brand new. Storing recipes in Rolodexes or index drawers was how home cooks stayed organized before screens did it for them. Each card held a treasure, handwritten notes, clipped magazine recipes, passed down family favorites. Some were stained with gravy, others had corners curled from constant use. Sorted by category or meal type, they could be flipped through in seconds. No scrolling, no searching. Just a few flicks, and you had your answer. It made choosing dinner feel personal, even fun. You were not just picking a recipe, you were flipping through memories. A holiday pie, a church potluck casserole, Tuesday's go-to meatloaf. It was all there, ready when you needed it. Organized, accessible, and always within reach. And unlike digital files that vanish with a dead battery, these cards lived on in drawers, boxes, and binders, quietly holding generations of know-how at your fingertips. Grandmas thought that rolling pins were pretty essential to a good baking session. You could not go a day without seeing one be put to use, as it was just a very multi-purpose tool that helped in every way possible. You could flatten dough with them, roll out a pie crust or a tart crust, as well as the doughs for cookies. You could get cookie dough to a very precise thickness with a rolling pin, and many a wonderful batch of gingerbread, shortbread, and red velvet cookies, which were really popular back then, were rolled out thanks to these pins. In the hands of an amateur, they may not be the best tool, but in the hands of a veteran home chef that has been rolling and baking for most of their life, there was arguably no tool better than these pins. If you even needed to make croissants, puff pastry, or donuts, you could use rolling pins. And if you wanted to save a little on birthday costs by baking a cake at home, that was pretty easy thanks to a grandma who knew how to work a pin. Salt is really good at quickly cleaning your iron pans. This happens for a few reasons, but two of them are that salt just happens to be inherently very abrasive, and it's also very good at degreasing. This helps food that's stuck on the pan and any grease that also won't go away to come off easily. You don't want to be damaging the surface of your pan after all. Why is salt like that though? Salt happens to be really coarse, and that makes it really good for situations where you would need an abrasive. Sprinkle just a little bit on a hot pan with a bit of leftover oil and start scrubbing with a cloth. You'll see the difference almost immediately, and that's all thanks to the coarseness of salt. Why does salt work as a degreaser? Well, that's because when you use it alongside heat, salt changes its properties a little, as most things do when they come into contact with heat. Now, salt can help to absorb and break down greasy surfaces because it helps draw that grease away. Salt has a lot of good absorption properties too. It's really good at taking away moisture from other liquids and oils. It's also good for preventing some rust, but that's a little side tip I'm including for free. On the other hand, pemmican is a traditional food developed by indigenous peoples of North America. They were a very ideal way to preserve meat, fat, and berries all in one for long-term storage, and it's probably one of the earliest examples we have of portable food that was put in a compact form because it needed to. It was ideal for travel, trading, and quick consumption, all factors that American industries and companies would keep in mind going forward. How does all this work, though? Bison, deer, and elk are all good sources of lean meat and were herded by indigenous peoples for a long time. All the meat from these animals would be dried, either through sun-drying it or through smoking it. In place of that, rendered fat like tallow would be mixed with the powdered dried meat, and this would seal the meat, preventing any air from interacting with it and excess moisture ruining the drying process. Berries also would contain acidic compounds and antioxidants that would help kill microbe activity overall and help reduce spoilage, and the final mix of this would be molded into cakes and balls and put into compact containers. If you made pemmican properly, it could actually last all year or even more than that, and it was packed with all kinds of nutrition that were important for a nomadic lifestyle. In short, this was a wonder food, and it was built to take care of everything you would need nutritionally. So wax paper really helps keep ice cream soft because it helps stop those nasty little ice crystals from forming thanks to cutting off its exposure to air. Ice cream tends to get icy or hard over the course of its short life thanks to the large ice crystals that take shape over the surface. This makes it feel really grainy, and it almost means you need to bite the ice cream instead of licking it, and that's just not nice for anyone involved. Wax paper stops this problem right in its tracks by cutting off any exposure to the air, which means that the crystals don't really ever get the chance to form in the first place. This way, ice cream also doesn't lose any moisture as the wax paper helps to retain it. If you don't ever store your ice cream properly, that is, without any airtight sealing, it goes through something known as freezer burn. That happens when the surface of your ice cream gets dehydrated and gets exposed to just a bit too much air. Think of it like getting a cold, if your ice cream could even get that. Just a bit of wax paper takes care of all this, and for almost no effort, too. Something that was really common as a bit of decoration in households back then was a teapot. In a sense, it has lost the same love it had in its golden days where people only used teapots for storing their freshly brewed tea, since microwaves are so incredibly common now. They were common in rural areas as well, which is likely where teapots became part of the cottagecore aesthetic. They were also used to brew tea, as you could steep tea leaves in them and let the hot water really soak in all of the flavors and aroma. Teapots came in different shapes and sizes, and you could always experiment and see which one worked the best for you. So, you're all no stranger to the concept of heat being really good at sterilizing things. That goes for pretty much every kind of food you've ever had, but it also goes for your bottles too. Why? Well, heat actually kills a lot more things than you might know. It kills pretty much any kind of bacteria, virus, and fungi. And while I'm not trying to imply you wouldn't know that, what I do think is that people, myself included, aren't aware of just how many bacteria there are on surfaces around us. Actually, the number is staggering. They all die of around 212 degrees Fahrenheit though, and that's the temperature of boiling water. This helps to completely obliterate most of these organisms on a cellular level, which is pretty metal if you ask me. The high temperature literally breaks them down into nothing, and they either become inactive because structurally they either just can't work anymore or they are outright killed. Pretty neat, right? Not only do you end up getting your water bottles sterilized, but they end up becoming as clean as they can be too. If you would bury root vegetables in the crown, then you were literally taking advantage of the natural regulation of the earth. This was a common practice that people did to keep vegetables as fresh as they could be and extend their shelf life, and it was something you'd see a lot throughout the winter. Basically, in the colder months, since the ground tends to maintain a consistently cool temperature, it helps slow the metabolic process of most vegetables down. This helps to stave off the decaying process, but the temperature of the soil during the winter is actually a lot lower than you think. It's literally just a few degrees Fahrenheit above the freezing point, and this way, not only do you get to preserve your fruit, but the overall nutritional content and texture get preserved too. Most vegetables also really need to be hydrated properly, or they'll shrivel up and die, and soil acts as a natural wellspring of moisture, so you get that covered easily. Butter dishes with lids were something that you would find in almost every household. Just like you would walk in most homes today and expect to find a coffee maker or a deep fryer, back then, in the age of our grandparents, butter dishes were very popular ways of storing the spread. You would keep them at room temperature instead of in the fridge, so they were always soft and spreadable, and you would protect them from any dirt. These existed even before the time of accessible and affordable refrigeration, and they were made from glass or ceramic. Usually, they would be pretty fashionable too, with lots of unique designs and ornate detail put into them. Speaking of fridges, how did people preserve things before they came around? Because keeping everything in a prison of ice was not ideal either. So, you really want that aesthetically perfect slice of cake, right? The one that looks like it's right out of a TV ad? The one that just looks wonderfully symmetrical and like it was cut by a pro? You can't get that with a knife, despite what the TV shows. We've all been there, friend. I'll let you in on a little secret too. They probably don't use knives either. When you start with a knife, especially if the blade is dull or blunt, then the pressure that the knife gives off might cause some pretty uneven compression throughout the cake. This can happen because of the knife or just you using too much force, but whatever the cause, you get uneven slices as a result. However, you don't get this problem with a string line. Know why? String lines create uniform pressure across the entire surface of the cake. You can pull the cake through the cake without much force either, unlike a knife, where you'd kind of have to try to push down. These two factors make string lines almost irreplaceable when it comes to slicing cake, because it means you get the most even slice with the least amount of force. Also, have you ever noticed the way cake sticks to knives? Strings don't really have that problem because of their thinness. Knives, on the other hand, are prone to dragging a lot of the cake with them. Now, you've probably heard your grandmother emphasize the importance of always keeping your pasta dry. But have you ever thought about why that is? The thing with drying pasta is that besides just avoiding basic issues like how it clumps together, becomes the worst thing ever to eat, and just loses its freshness, you really just want to preserve pasta because of one simple concept: moisture content. Like we've discussed before, moisture is something that bacteria and mold need desperately to grow. If they don't get it, they're liable to have a breakdown, figuratively and literally. This is why drying pasta has been such a tradition in Italian culture and just about everywhere that popularly consumes it. Drying your pasta reduces the water content by a good 15%, and that helps the pasta achieve a much higher shelf life. I'm talking months, and if you really know how to preserve, then even years. Don't believe me? Trust me, there's an Italian on YouTube with an essay on it. Butter curlers were another little trinket that saw a lot of use in most households, thanks to the simple benefits of life it would let you enjoy, like very pretty-looking butter. Some home chefs were much more focused on presentation, decoration, and maintaining the ambiance with the look of their food than others. They always had butter curlers handy because at formal meals or dinner parties, this elevated the entire mood because of how good it could make your food look. Homes that had hosting and entertaining as a priority always had curlers around, and nowadays some still use them because of the flexibility it gives you. With butter curlers, you could get more controlled and moderate curls of butter out instead of large spreads that really burned through your stock and had you running to the grocer's again and again. Cloth bags can actually help your cheese age just right, and I bet that sounds like a really weird mix to you, but it's as legitimate as a mix can be. The right conditions for aging all happen inside the wonderful confines of a cloth bag, so you have that for one. Basically, to age cheese and to age it properly, you need three different things. You need moisture that's regulated, and you need a lot of air circulation. None of that means anything if your environment isn't clean, so you need to be able to prevent contamination as well as you can. Moisture regulation is really important because as it keeps aging, then cheese starts losing moisture. Cloth bags, on the other hand, are made of really breathable material and help moisture to evaporate a bit more slowly so that the cheese doesn't get too dry. Cheese aging also helps keep air balanced since the cloth bag is really porous. All those tiny little openings help air to flow around the cheese, which you really need for the health of the rind. It helps for those helpful little bacteria and molds that you find on cheese to grow. Some of those microorganisms don't deserve to die in a heat death. They make your burger a lot better. Third of all, the bag itself just works as a natural barrier against any kind of dirty substance, insect, or material. All in all, you get a perfect vibe for your cheese. So, this one might take you for a spin, and I'm not sure if most of you would even be familiar with the concept. Potting your butter is a pretty historical technique, but not one that's especially popular in United States history or culture. The idea this time around is to take something like a jar or a crock and store your butter in that, and then cover it with a generous layer of clarified fat. This can either be lard or the clarified fat that comes from the butter itself, but the reason for doing this is that the layer acts as a seal. It helps to keep the butter fresh, and that's because the water and milk solids from butter are removed. What you get is pure, unadulterated butterfat left. Since it is pure, it's less likely to spoil in comparison to whole butter. Protecting it from the air also does the usual routine of keeping it safe from airborne germs and microbes. People used to do this a lot because in rural areas, even when refrigeration was a thing, it hadn't become a widespread or accessible practice. In cold places, for example, the mountain ranges here, storing these pots in dark basements would help push the shelf life up even more. Have you ever heard of turning a milk jar into a butter maker? I bet you haven't, because if I'm being totally honest with you, I didn't know either. Yet the process of churning really helps to keep the cream from separating from the fat that you find in the buttermilk. The milk jar, since it's a glass container with an airtight seal, can even help to churn the butter. I'll tell you why. Butter is made when you basically irritate heavy cream and violently shake it until the point that the cream starts to mix together and stick. Then, you take the liquid and separate it, and that is how you get buttermilk. Milk jars end up being the ideal choice for this because they can hold cream really well and also handle the amount of violent churning and shaking you need to really create the butter. The churning is what causes the cream to start turning into butter, and the tight seal really helps you keep the moisture you need to retain the texture. Besides the obvious reason for recycling and reusing things to avoid any unnecessary spending, these tins were also significantly durable and lasted a long time. They were usually always the perfect size as well, and it was as if they were meant to be a permanent home for sewing supplies. Spools of thread, thimbles, needles, and sharp objects all would hold in one box while being very easy to grab when you needed it. Once you were done, you could just put everything back. Potatoes are really starchy, and this gives them a lot of benefits outside the kitchen and your plate of food too. It helps them take away any kind of excess salt from your dish by just making sure that you don't have excessive moisture. As we have gone through so many times in this video already, the moisture amount in your food needs to be just right for a lot of things to work, as they ideally should. Potatoes, being composed almost entirely of starch, have a massive capacity for absorbing all kinds of liquids. You put raw potatoes into some kind of soup, stew, or sauce, and just watch as it takes away the liquid and salt. Most of the salty liquid gets absorbed by the potatoes thanks to a process known as osmosis. This is what happens when liquids or water move from one object to another to balance out the overall concentrations. The starches of the potato help to make a membrane that helps to draw the liquid into the potato. Plus, besides just that, potatoes are really good at diluting salt. Why does this help? It helps to keep the salt-to-food ratio low, which ensures that your steak or burger is just the right amount of bitter and not overpoweringly so. All in all, a little potatoes on the side have more benefits than you'd initially expect. Honey preservation is basically one of the few bounties of nature that will almost never betray you. It's good for your skin. It helps to boost your gut health. It doesn't ever go bad. And now I'm going to tell you all about how it preserves itself better than anything else. So, the thing with honey is that the super low moisture content in honey basically makes it impossible for any of the icky and nasty stuff we've gone over so far to grow or even get a chance to come into existence. Honey's also really acidic, and it falls anywhere between 3.2 and 4.5 on the pH scale. This helps to curb stomp the growth of any gross bacteria and fungi, so it's got a natural preservative quality in that. Anything that's got a strong acidic background naturally will do that. But honey works better for a few other reasons, like how honey naturally exudes something called glucose oxidase. When you combine this with just glucose, or sugar, you get hydrogen peroxide. This is a natural microbe hunter, and it basically destroys bacteria on site. Honey has a high sugar content already and is largely made up entirely of glucose and fructose, so go figure. Long story short, the thing is just built different and built strong. JellO molds were a typical 20th century snack that let people get creative and fashionable with their desserts. You could use them for gelatin-based dishes or jelly bowls and cakes, and they were very common at parties and family gatherings. Of course, the kids in particular enjoyed JellO molds the most out of everyone else, even if they had no idea how to use them to shape the JellO properly. That is probably why every grandma always had some of these though, so that when their grandkids eventually did come over, they could enjoy playing around with their food a little before. After all, they would probably get scolded for doing so at home. To be honest, most JellO mold brands got really popular in the 1960s in particular as they became a convenient trend since JellO was also getting more and more popular. Pre-freezing pies really helps before you delve deep into that baking rabbit hole, and it's for two reasons. You get a much flakier crust, which I'm assuming is something you want, and the fillings also stay really even, which I know you want. So, there are some sciencey reasons behind why this happens, and we'll definitely be getting into them. But if you're here for the too long, didn't read the version, then basically, moisture control, temperature regulation, and it helps keep the fat. Now, for the actual explanation. So, pie dough has a lot of cold fat, and that's what helps make that really flaky texture in the first place. Pre-freezing helps to solidify that fact and make sure the fat remains as solid as it can be, and the fat hopefully maintains its structure too. Plus, when you usually bake a pie without freezing it, the soft, soggy, and moist filling can keep the bottom crust really soggy. And this is a problem because you always want a firm base for your pie. The cold temperature of a pie that's been pre-frozen is an entirely different ballgame though. This helps slow the process down in the oven, and overall, the fat at the bottom of the dough solidifies before the filling has a chance to soften it up. The filling itself is also getting more set and firm, and that's because being frozen helps keep it in a solid state, which helps make sure that it cooks more evenly. So, just a small trip in the freezer can give your pie the pick-me-up it needed, huh? Lye curing your fish has been the alkaline all-rounder for all your fish preservation-related needs for centuries. This traditional preservation method takes full advantage of lye and shows you just how much of an MVP it really is. This process actually goes back to the very early times of Asian cultures, and the reason behind how this works is pretty interesting. Lye as an alkaline solution raises the pH level of a fish by like 2 folds, and this would typically look like the fish being treated in a diluted solution of lye that's been mixed with water and salt. Basically, fish has a lot of protein in it, which, is no surprise, right? What you might not know is that the alkalinity of lye disrupts that protein and makes it a lot more resistant to spoilage. It changes the whole structure, so now you don't just have protein, you have protein pro. Get it? I'll see myself out. Anyway, it doesn't just do those enhancements, it also boosts your catch of the day's resistance to those filthy microbes that keep popping up every 2 minutes. Pretty neat, right? Wooden spoon collections were also a very typical sight in America during the 20th century. A lot of these things got as popular as they did because they lasted so long, and were also pretty durable. Nowadays, it is very easy to get a replacement for something if it breaks or something goes wrong, but it was more of an inconvenience then. Wooden spoons didn't melt or warp even with daily exposure to heat, so they were used in nearly every aspect of cooking. Besides the practicalities of all of it, the aesthetic appeal was also really out there. They went along with most of the interior of homes back then, which was pretty wood-oriented, and the rustic charm and warm, dulcet tones of a well-stacked collection of wooden spoons really brought it all together. It's when the little things come together that a place really shines, you know? String is actually really good, not just for slicing your cake and your desserts, but for stringing up and trussing your poultry too. It helps keep the bird in a compact and even shape, which, as you may have obviously guessed, helps ensure that the bird cooks evenly too. trussing your poultry with string helps to make sure that the bird is cooking evenly because of the fact that it helps maintain the overall shape of the bird. The legs and wings stay close to the body instead of away, and this helps the heat travel overall a lot more easily throughout the bird. You get uniform cooking this way, which is always better as opposed to, well, ununiform cooking. The poultry really keeps its moisture too, which is always good because, let's be honest, nobody likes eating a dry bird. The tight packaging helps to make sure the moisture doesn't get away, and the meat overall stays a lot more tender and juicy. Trussing also has an unexpected benefit, but since the body stays tighter and more together, the presentation ends up looking better too. This is a part of why trussing your bird around Thanksgiving became such a massively practiced hobby across the United States. After all, when the occasion is special, you don't just want to make a good bird, you want to make it look pretty sitting there with all the toppings too. Then there's the stuffing, which always tends to kill everyone's vibe when it overflows. The aesthetic appeal of the bird, combined with how it just overall cooks a lot better and stays more crispy too thanks to the even baking, means that there's almost never a reason not to truss your bird. Now, cheese aging more or less has the same deal. Maturing cheese over time to give each wheel its own unique flavor, personality, and profile is an Italian hobby that probably predates the country's own existence, but in America it was brought on over during the 20th century. The science behind cheese aging basically has a lot to do with breaking down the fat of your regular unchecked milk fats into free fatty acids, which for our purposes, let's just say they have a lot more taste and flavor. Now, the other process is proteolysis, and during the entire cheese aging, enzymes that were taken from the milk and the bacterial cultures used to make the cheese help to break down the proteins that are there. It does the same thing as before, and the longer this goes on, the stronger those flavors become. That's why they really let those things sit for years, because it's basically a game of patience. The one who waits the longest gets the best cheese. So clothespins really help when it comes to sealing bags, and that's thanks to their effective design. This is because the clothespins help to close the bag without any kind of secondary tool. You don't need pins and a staple, or needles and a thread, or anything really. All you need is a clothespin, which comes built in with a spring-loaded clamping mechanism. Why is this important? Well, it lets the clothespin hold on to items like a bag extremely hard. You kind of want to do that with something as important as your bag. The closure helps to keep any unwanted air outside too, and that means that anything in your bag stays fresh and doesn't get spoiled. It could be your lunch, it could be a salad, or it could be a product that's not supposed to touch air. Plus, clothespins are really reusable, so there's no reason not to be using these. Drying your meat and fish in the wind has also been a pretty cultural practice of people who live lives dependent on hunting, gathering, and community-based living. Drying in the wind actually works better because the wind accelerates the evaporation process by getting rid of the moisture that your protein, fish, red meat, or chicken releases on its own. You want to keep it like this because the moving air makes the moisture go away as soon as it releases, making sure it stays chronically dehydrated. Fish, especially the ones that were caught in coastal cities and regions, also used to be gutted and split open and then hung out to dry. This would help the brine enhance the flavor and also make the fish overall easier to carry and transport. Besides that, there were lots of issues with this though. It was really only ideal in warm or moist climates. In cold ones, the humidity had to be low and the air had to be pretty crisp. Also, you had to keep moving and turning the fish or meat so that it would dry evenly and that the moisture was even going away. If you didn't do this, you risked spoiling it yourself. I think there are better ways of drying, but this wasn't a trick that would apply to people like you or me anyway. Floral China had a bit of a renaissance in the 20th century, and those crockpots always looked good with it. This was because Victorian design trends started having a big focus on ornate and floral prints, and China manufacturers listened as soon as the trend popped up. They wanted to put out more and more floral designs to attract more of an audience, and they especially wanted to get ahead early in the rat race involving dinnerware sets. These sets started becoming very widespread, and most would come with floral designs, and it was like a whole new market with untapped sales for a lot of producers. As a result, you had every house loaded with matching fine china sets that always looked like a painting, or had every kind of flour you had seen in your life on a different plate. Why should you ever use boiled water to clear ice or to get rid of any existing ice? Well, besides the obvious logical leap of hot beating cold, the Mpemba effect is a thing too. While I don't think this is a commonly known phenomenon, it is one we could stand to learn just a bit more about. The Mpemba effect is basically scientists gathering together to observe that hot water freezes decently faster than cold water does. Why would this happen? Well, there's actually a lot of debate on that little topic alone. There are lots of theories that suggest that if you start with hot water, you get some benefits that you otherwise would never get with cold water. For example, hot water evaporates a lot faster than cold water, and that means less overall water has to freeze. Then, you also get convection currents that help cool the water since the cold travels a lot easier. Plus, hot water doesn't supercool, and supercooling is essentially just a state where water's temperature goes below the freezing point, but it doesn't turn to ice. Since hot water doesn't run into this issue, it actually might be possible that this helps it freeze a bit better than its colder alternative. Overall, when it comes to clearing ice out, frozen water traps all kinds of gases. Remember those conspiracy theories about ancient world-ending plagues being released as a result of the polar caps melting in the South and North Poles? Yeah, ice holds a lot more than just ancient sick insects. It can trap pretty much anything, from minerals to air bubbles, and hot water really helps clear this out because it dissolves those gases and kills those impurities. Maybe it's less clearing the ice and more obliterating whatever's inside it. But either way, what you need gone gets gone pretty fast. If these time-saving tips reminded you of how smart kitchens used to be, drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe before dinner sneaks up on you again.